Moving to Oak Ridge Estates seemed like the perfect solution at the time. The neighborhood was quiet, the houses well-maintained, and most importantly, it was only 10 minutes from the hospital where my mother received her treatments. After her stroke left her partially paralyzed, I had quit my job in the city and moved in to become her full-time caretaker. The single-story house we found was perfect, spacious enough for her wheelchair to navigate comfortably, with a backyard that caught the morning sun just right for her daily vitamin D exposure the doctors had recommended. I remember the day we moved in. The late summer breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the neighborhood. A few neighbors stopped by with casseroles and introduction cards. Most seemed genuinely welcoming. The Thompsons across the street, old Mr. Jenkins next door who offered to help with yard work whenever needed. Everyone except Brenda Wilson, the HOA president, who lived in the large corner house with the perfectly trimmed hedges and not a single blade of grass out of place. "Just making sure you received your welcome packet," she said, though her smile never reached her eyes as she handed me a thick binder. "We have very specific guidelines here at Oak Ridge. We pride ourselves on maintaining exceptional property values." I thanked her and placed the binder on the shelf, too busy with unpacking and settling my mother into her new bedroom to concern myself with mailbox color regulations and lawn height restrictions. My focus was entirely on creating a safe environment for her. Her condition required an oxygen concentrator that ran continuously, and the electric chair lift I had installed to help her navigate the single step into the sunroom was essential for her limited mobility. "I need to make sure you never lose power," I explained to my mother as I installed a backup generator in the garage. "The doctors said even brief interruptions in your oxygen supply could be dangerous." My mother, always more concerned about being a burden than her own well-being, protested. "You are spending too much money on me. I will be fine." But I insisted. I even went a step further and installed a small solar panel array on the south-facing portion of our roof, barely visible from the street, but enough to power her medical equipment if both the main power and the generator failed. I worked remotely as a software engineer, which allowed me to be home with her most days. Our routine became comfortable: morning medications, breakfast together, work at my desk while she read or watched her shows, afternoon therapy exercises, dinner, and then evening movies before bed. The first HOA violation notice came exactly 2 weeks after we moved in. Trash bins visible from street beyond permitted hours. It read in bold red letters. I apologized and made sure to wheel them behind the garage immediately after collection. The second notice arrived 3 days later. Lawn exceeds maximum height of 4 inches. I hired a lawn service the next day. The third was about our mailbox. Apparently, the previous owner had painted it an unapproved shade of beige. Each time I complied without complaint. My mother needed stability, not neighborhood drama. But the notices kept coming, each more trivial than the last. One even cited us for having non-approved wildflowers in a small garden bed my mother tended to from her wheelchair. "Maybe we should talk to her," my mother suggested one evening as I showed her the latest violation. "No need to rock the boat," I replied, crumpling the paper. "We will just follow their rules. We have more important things to worry about." I had no idea then how wrong I was. I had no idea that Brenda's fake smile masked something far more dangerous than petty rule enforcement. I had no idea that our quiet life was about to become a battleground. The fines began accumulating faster than I could address the alleged violations. $50 for wind chimes that exceeded acceptable noise levels. $75 for a bird feeder that was not approved wildlife accommodation. $150 for my mother's physical therapy equipment being visible through the front window, each one more absurd than the last. "This is getting ridiculous," I muttered, staring at the latest notice claiming our garden hose was an unsightly exterior feature when coiled beside the spigot. The total had reached nearly $700 in just 6 weeks. I decided it was time to attend an HOA meeting and address these issues directly. The monthly gathering was held in the community clubhouse, a small building with uncomfortable folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a table where Brenda and 4 other board members sat like judges at a tribunal. "We will now hear from new residents with concerns," Brenda announced after covering standard business matters. Her voice carried that artificial sweetness that barely concealed disdain. I stood, introducing myself politely. "I would like to discuss the numerous violation notices we have received. My mother is disabled, and some of these requirements are creating hardship for us." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brenda's smile tightened. "Rules are rules," she responded. "They apply equally to everyone. Your situation does not entitle you to special treatment." I explained about my mother's medical equipment, hoping for some understanding. "The solar panel I installed is a safety backup. Her oxygen cannot be interrupted." A man too rose ahead, turned around. "My application to install solar was denied last year. Why should you get special treatment?" "This is not about aesthetics," I explained. "This is about medical necessity." Brenda tapped her gavel. "The Architectural Committee has reviewed your unauthorized installation and found it in violation of Covenant Section 7.3. You have 15 days to remove it." "But my mother—" "Perhaps this community is not the right fit for your circumstances," Brenda interrupted, her voice dripping with false concern. "There are other neighborhoods with fewer standards." I felt my face growing hot as scattered murmurs of agreement filled the room. The meeting moved on to other topics while I sat in stunned silence. On my way out, an elderly gentleman caught my arm. "Watch yourself," he whispered. "Brenda has had 3 homeowners removed this year alone. She does not like being challenged." The next morning, a certified letter arrived containing a mandatory compliance order to remove the solar panel within 2 weeks or face legal action. I consulted a lawyer who reviewed our HOA covenant. "They do have broad authority," he admitted, "but there may be exceptions under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It will take time to challenge, though." Time was something my mother might not have if her oxygen was compromised. I filed the necessary paperwork to request a medical accommodation, and we waited. Brenda's response came not through official channels but in person. She appeared on our doorstep one evening, 2 board members flanking her like bodyguards. "I understand you have filed for a special exemption," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Yes, for my mother's medical equipment," I replied. "Her doctor has provided documentation." Brenda's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the coldness beneath. "Let me be clear. Power in this neighborhood is a privilege. The board decides who belongs here. Your exemption has been denied." "You cannot do that without reviewing the medical evidence," I protested. "We just did," she smiled thinly. "The fines will continue to accrue until you comply, and we will place a lien on your property if necessary." The fines doubled, then tripled. I fought back through proper channels, filing appeals and complaints, but Brenda had the system locked down. By the end of the month, we supposedly owed over $5,000. Then it happened. I was preparing dinner while my mother watched the news from her recliner. Without warning, every light, every appliance, every medical device went silent. Not a power outage, our neighbors' homes remained brightly lit. Just hours, plunged into darkness. I rushed outside with a flashlight to check the electrical panel. Down the street, I spotted utility workers near a connection box, with Brenda supervising from her SUV. When she saw me approaching, she rolled down her window. "Unauthorized electrical modifications need to be inspected," she said with that same thin smile. "Safety first." My blood ran cold. My mother needs her oxygen. You cannot just cut our power. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before installing unauthorized equipment," she replied. "The inspection process takes 3 to 5 business days." The emergency backup generator kicked in immediately, but it was only designed to run for 8 hours. My mother's oxygen machine hummed back to life, but the display showed an error code from the power interruption. Her oxygen saturation monitor beeped warnings as the numbers dropped from 95 to 87, then lower. "Mom, stay calm," I said, trying to hide my own panic. "I am going to get you to the hospital." Her breathing was becoming more labored. "What happened?" she whispered. "Just a power issue. Nothing to worry about." I lied as I gathered her medications and overnight bag. The solar panel that might have saved us had been disconnected at the breaker box. They had been thorough in their sabotage. The drive to the emergency room was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, my mother's face looked grayer, her breathing more strained. The hospital staff rushed her in immediately when they saw her condition. "Oxygen deprivation can cause permanent damage," the doctor explained later as I sat beside her hospital bed. "Especially for someone in your mother's condition." How long was her machine off? "Maybe 20 minutes, I admitted. "Will she be okay?" The doctor's expression was grave. "She stabilized quickly, which is good, but another episode like this could be fatal. Her system cannot handle the stress." I spent the night in the waiting room, unable to sleep in the uncomfortable chair, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the minutes. My grief slowly crystallized into something harder, colder. This was not just harassment anymore. This was attempted murder. Morning came with watery sunlight filtering through the hospital windows. A nurse brought me coffee as I called the power company. "We have no record of scheduled maintenance at your address," the representative said. "But we do show that a shutoff was requested by the Homeowners Association due to safety concerns about unauthorized modifications." "They had no right," I protested. "Sir, they filed the proper paperwork. We had to comply." When I returned home to get clean clothes for my mother, there was a new envelope taped to our door. Inside was a notice informing us that the HOA had filed a lien against our property for unpaid fines totaling $7,850. They were moving to force a sale. I sat on the front steps, my head in my hands. How had things escalated so quickly? How could people be so cruel? My phone buzzed, a text from an old college friend, Marcus, who had heard about my mother's hospitalization through a mutual acquaintance. "Let's grab coffee," his message read. "You sound like you need to talk." Marcus had always been the level-headed one in our friend group. After law school, he had gone into real estate law and now worked for a mid-sized firm downtown. We met at a cafe halfway between the hospital and my house. "This is beyond HOA bullying," he said after I explained the situation. "This is malicious." "I have tried everything legal," I replied. "They have too much power." Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Maybe not as much as you think. Did you know most HOA neighborhoods do not actually own the streets they control?" I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Many subdivisions have private roads that were initially owned by the developer, then transferred to a holding company or trust. The HOA typically has easement rights, but not ownership. And Oak Ridge Estates. Marcus pulled out his tablet and did some quick research. Interesting. The streets in your neighborhood are owned by Wilson Development Trust. They are private, not city-maintained. Wilson, as in Brenda Wilson. Probably related. But here is what's interesting. According to county records, the trust is looking to liquidate some assets, including your street. My heart began to race. The street is for sale. Not publicly, but with the right offer and the right attorney. Marcus smiled for the first time since we sat down. Want me to make some calls? A plan began forming in my mind. If Brenda wanted to play games with power, I would show her what real power looked like. Do it, I said, and keep it quiet. I do not want anyone in the neighborhood to know. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, legal consultations, and financial gymnastics. Marcus helped me establish a shell company, Evergreen Property Holdings, with myself as the sole director but my name buried under layers of corporate documentation. We made contact with the Wilson Development Trust through Marcus's firm, expressing interest in acquiring the private roadways of Oak Ridge Estates. The trust is managed by Brenda's uncle, Marcus explained. He is getting older and wants to simplify his portfolio. He does not even realize what he is sitting on. The negotiations were delicate. The trust initially wanted $300,000 for the entire street network, a steep price that would have been impossible for me under normal circumstances. But I was no longer operating under normal circumstances. I can get $180,000, I told Marcus after liquidating my 401k, selling my stock portfolio, and taking a loan against my life insurance policy. Is it enough? Let me see what I can do, he replied. Marcus worked his magic. He pointed out that the roads would soon need resurfacing, an expense the trust would avoid by selling. He highlighted potential liability issues. He mentioned that finding another buyer for such a specific asset would be difficult. 3 days later, he called with news. They accepted $175,000. We can close by the end of the week. It was nearly everything I had. My entire financial security evaporated in a single transaction. But as I sat beside my mother's hospital bed, watching her struggle to breathe even with supplemental oxygen, I knew it was worth it. We are going home tomorrow, I told her, holding her fragile hand. And things are going to be different. Different how? She asked weakly. You will see, just rest now. The closing took place in Marcus's office. I signed document after document, transferring ownership of every inch of Oak Ridge Estates roadways from the main entrance to the cul-de-sacs, including all sidewalks and common access areas, to Evergreen Property Holdings. My company, my street. Congratulations, Marcus said, handing me the final deed. You now control access to every home in the neighborhood. What exactly does that mean legally? I asked, still struggling to believe what I had done. It means you own the ground beneath their driveways. You control who can drive on your roads. You can grant or deny easement rights, the legal permission to cross your property to anyone you choose. Including Brenda. Especially Brenda. I hired a specialized attorney who drafted new easement agreements for every home in the neighborhood. The terms were simple. Residents could purchase access rights for $100 per month, a reasonable fee for road maintenance, or negotiate individual agreements. Those who refused would technically be trespassing every time they drove to their homes. Is this really legal? I asked the attorney. Completely, she assured me. Private road ownership gives you significant authority. The HOA controls the homes and yards, but you control how people get to them. I installed security cameras around our property and at key intersections legally, since I now own those locations. I documented everything meticulously, preparing for the inevitable battle ahead. The power company restored our electricity after Marcus threatened legal action, and my mother settled back into her home, unaware of the seismic shift about to rock the neighborhood. "Why are you smiling so much?" she asked one evening. "Because justice takes many forms," I replied, watching Brenda's house through the window. "Sometimes it just takes a while to arrive." The morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for changing lives. 26 certified letters went out, one to each household in Oak Ridge Estates. Each contained the same information: notification of the change in road ownership, the requirement for new access agreements, and the consequences of noncompliance. I had the letters timed to arrive simultaneously at 10:00 a.m. From my home office window, I watched as the mail carrier made his rounds. At 10:15, the first door opened. The Thompsons, always early risers. I saw Mrs. Thompson read the letter, then call her husband over. By 10:30, lights were turning on all over the neighborhood as people opened their unexpected notifications. Brenda's reaction was exactly what I had anticipated. At 10:47, she stormed out of her house, letter clutched in her hand, and marched directly toward my home. Her face was flushed with fury, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfect hair. I opened the door before she could knock. "Good morning, Brenda. What can I do for you?" "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, waving the letter. "This has to be some kind of joke." "Not at all," I replied calmly. "Everything in that letter is legally binding. I now own all roadways in Oak Ridge Estates through my company, Evergreen Property Holdings." "That is impossible. The roads belong to the neighborhood." "Actually, they belonged to Wilson Development Trust until 3 days ago. You can verify with the county recorder's office if you like. All the documentation is public record now." Her face paled slightly. "This is some kind of scam. I am calling the police." "Feel free. I have all the legal documentation right here." I held up a folder containing copies of the deed and property transfer. "But you might want to consider that you are currently trespassing on my property." "Your property? This is the public sidewalk." "Not anymore. Please review Section 3 of the notification letter." Brenda snatched the folder from my hands and began flipping through it frantically. As the reality dawned on her, her expression shifted from anger to disbelief, then to fear. "You cannot do this," she whispered. "I already have," I replied. "Now, would you like to discuss an access agreement for your property? The standard rate is $100 per month, but in your case, I might need to add a surcharge for administrative complexities." "This will never hold up in court," she shouted, throwing the folder back at me. "It already has. Similar cases have established clear precedent. Private road ownership is well protected under state law." By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Neighbors I had barely spoken to were suddenly desperate to talk. Some were angry, others confused, a few genuinely frightened. I spoke to each one calmly, explaining their options: sign the agreement, negotiate terms, or find somewhere else to park off my property. Mr. Jenkins from next door came over in person, his weathered face creased with concern. "I always treated you and your mother well," he said. "I even offered to help with your yard." "And you will receive favorable terms," I assured him. "This is not about punishing everyone, just those who abused their power." Brenda, meanwhile, was rallying her forces. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. Through my newly installed cameras, I watched them gesturing angrily and making phone calls. By evening, a legal notice was delivered to my door, a restraining order application claiming harassment and intimidation. I called Marcus immediately. They are trying to block us with a restraining order. On what grounds? He asked. The usual harassment, intimidation causing distress. He laughed. That will be thrown out before it even gets to a judge. You have not done anything illegal or threatening. You are just exercising your property rights. He was right. The next morning, the application was rejected. Brenda's legal counterattack had failed before it even began. 1 week passed, then 2. The neighborhood existed in a state of suspended animation. Most residents had grudgingly signed the access agreements, recognizing the legal reality of their situation. A few holdouts remained, Brenda, of course, and the 4 other HOA board members who followed her lead. They think I will back down, I told my mother, who had finally been made aware of the situation. They think this is a bluff. And is it? She asked, her eyes sharper than they had been in months. The return home and proper medical care had improved her condition significantly. Not even a little bit. I filed formal trespassing notices against the 5 properties without agreements. The sheriff's department, after reviewing my documentation, agreed to enforce the private property restrictions. The date was set for the following Monday. Official notices would be served, and vehicles would be towed if found on my roads without authorization. The weekend before was tense. Rumors spread through the neighborhood that Brenda had secured some legal victory that would invalidate my ownership. Others whispered that the city was stepping in to seize the roads under eminent domain. None of it was true, but fear and hope spread easily among the desperate. Monday arrived with unexpected calm. The sheriff's deputies came at 9:00 a.m. sharp, 4 of them in official vehicles. I met them at the entrance to the neighborhood, providing them with maps and documentation. We will start with the Wilson residence, the lead deputy said, reviewing his paperwork, then proceed to the others in sequence. I followed at a respectful distance as they approached Brenda's immaculate home. She was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, a man in an expensive suit beside her, her attorney, I presumed. This is private property, the attorney began as the deputies approached. You have no jurisdiction here. We are enforcing a legal trespassing notice, the deputy replied, unimpressed. Here are the court-approved documents. What followed was both painful and satisfying to watch. The attorney scanned the papers, his confident expression faltering with each page. He pulled Brenda aside, speaking in urgent whispers, her face contorted with rage, then crumpled into despair. You have 24 hours to remove all vehicles from the roadways and driveways connected to them, the deputy announced officially. After that time, any unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense, and criminal trespassing charges may apply. The scene repeated at the other 4 houses. By noon, the entire neighborhood knew that this was real. This was happening. The mighty HOA board that had terrorized residents for years was being evicted, not from their homes, technically, but from access to them, which amounted to the same thing. Trucks began arriving that afternoon. Furniture appeared on lawns as the holdouts realized they had no choice but to leave. Some neighbors watched from windows. Others pretended nothing was happening. A few approached me with new negotiation attempts, but it was too late. You brought this on yourselves, I told one board member who pleaded for more time. You cut power to a disabled woman over a solar panel. Actions have consequences. Brenda held out until the final hour. At 8:45 the next morning, 15 minutes before the deadline, a moving truck pulled up to her house. She directed the movers with rigid efficiency, her face a mask of controlled fury. When she saw me watching from across the street, she marched over, stopping at the exact edge of my property line. "You will regret this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "People like you do not win against people like me." "I already have won," I replied simply. "And do you know why? Because I never wanted power over anyone. I just wanted to protect my mother." She spat on the ground between us. "This neighborhood will fall apart without proper oversight." "Perhaps, or perhaps it will become something better." At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the sheriff's deputies returned. Brenda's car was still in her driveway, technically now trespassing on my property. The deputies approached her with professional detachment. "Ma'am, you need to move your vehicle now, or it will be towed." For one brief moment, I thought she might refuse, might force them to drag her away in handcuffs, a final dramatic stand. Instead, she got into her luxury SUV without another word, started the engine, and drove away from Oak Ridge Estates for the last time. The transformation of Oak Ridge Estates did not happen overnight, but it began the moment Brenda's SUV disappeared around the corner. A weight lifted from the neighborhood, an oppressive force suddenly gone. In the following days, I met with each remaining resident individually, renegotiating access agreements based on how they had treated us during our ordeal. The Thompsons, who had always been kind, received permanent easements at no cost. Mr. Jenkins was given a lifetime access grant in exchange for helping with my mother's garden. Even most former board members, once freed from Brenda's influence, signed reasonable agreements and apologized for their behavior. "What will you do with all this power?" one resident asked during our meeting. "Distribute it," I replied, "the way it always should have been." I drafted a new charter for the neighborhood, not an HOA with punitive authority, but a community association focused on mutual support. Participation was voluntary. Rules were minimal and focused on safety rather than aesthetics. No fines, no liens, no threats. The vacant houses left behind by Brenda and her most loyal supporters were sold to new families, young couples with children, a retired teacher, a nurse who worked at my mother's hospital. Each new resident received the same welcome speech. "This is a community that values people over property values. We help each other here." I legally donated a small parcel of the common area to a medical nonprofit that provided home care services for disabled and elderly residents. They established a small office in the former HOA clubhouse, now renamed the Evelyn Thomas Community Center, after my mother. With the proceeds from the new access agreements, modest but steady income, I established a neighborhood emergency fund for residents facing unexpected hardships. The first grant went to a family whose child needed specialized medical equipment, no questions asked, no strings attached. My mother's health stabilized and even improved in the peaceful environment. The stress that had exacerbated her condition decreased significantly once she no longer lived in fear of arbitrary punishment. Her therapist noted marked improvement in her mobility and cognitive function. "You changed everything," she said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching children play freely on the sidewalk, drawing with chalk and riding bikes without fear of violation notices. "I just restored balance," I replied. 6 months after the evictions, we held the first Oak Ridge Estates community picnic in the park at the center of the neighborhood. Nearly every resident attended. People who had previously lived in isolation, afraid to violate some obscure covenant, now laughed and shared food together. Children played. Seniors chatted in the shade. The invisible walls between houses had dissolved. That evening, I sat alone on my porch, watching the sunset paint the street in gold. The same street I now owned. The same street where power had once been weaponized against the vulnerable. I thought about how different power could look depending on who wielded it and why. Brenda had seen power as control, the authority to punish and exclude. Her HOA had created a culture of fear and isolation, turning neighbors against each other in pursuit of a sterile perfection that served no one's happiness. True power, I had discovered, was not about control at all. It was about protection, about ensuring that the most vulnerable among us could live with dignity and safety, about creating space for community to flourish naturally, without coercion. As darkness fell and lights came on in homes up and down Evelyn Lane, yes, I had renamed the street after my mother, I realized that justice had never been about revenge. It had been about restoration all along, not taking power but returning it to where it belonged, in the hands of ordinary people who just wanted to live good lives together. In the end, I had not destroyed a neighborhood, I had freed one.